Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Suspects and Spirits. I'm your host, Taylor Seraphin, and my voice is really scratchy today, so I apologize in advance, but nothing I can do about it. I'm sitting here drinking my sparkling ice caffeine water. I don't know if you guys drink these, but they're so good. I've been trying to not drink soda. I mean, I didn't really drink a whole lot of soda before, but I'm trying not to drink it at all anymore because it's really not great for you. I'm drinking this because I've already had coffee today. How many cups of coffee are we having a day? You guys, how many? I wake up and I drink mushroom coffee in the morning. I drink Rise. I drink Rise coffee every morning. It's not a great taste when you first start drinking it. It does taste a little earthy, but I add cinnamon and honey and stuff to it. It tastes really good. I don't really add any creamer anymore. So I've been drinking these sparkling ice caffeinated waters and they're delicious. This one's a black raspberry. I don't know what we're doing for energy these days. Are we drinking 5 cups of coffee a day? I love matcha, but like how much matcha can I have in one day? But I'm just curious. What is everyone watching right now? I am so excited for the new Conjuring movie to come out in September. It's like my Christmas. It is. It's like my Christmas. I love that franchise so much. And actually a little sad for it to be over. You know, it's like when the last Harry Potter movie came out. I was so excited to see it. And then I got like instant depression afterwards because I knew it was going to be the last one. It wasn't, there weren't going to be any more. So I am excited for it. Also a little sad. Vera Farmiga is a queen and I love her with my whole heart. Like she's so cool. Patrick Wilson, he's so cool. They're so cool, guys. Fall cannot get here fast enough. I'm just sitting over here in my spooky vibes, patiently waiting for Halloween. And as much as I love spooky stuff and true crime, I do not love the one that I'm going to tell you today. This is an absolutely unhinged story. Today, we're going to be talking about Charles Albright. This episode is going to get a little graphic. Charles Albright was known as the eyeball killer. So, I mean, that kind of tells you a little bit of what you need to know. We're just going to get started because I don't really know how to segue into this man's. Charles Albright was born on August 10th, 1933 in Amarillo, Texas. Yes, Amarillo, Amarillo, however you want to say it. By zodiac standards, that makes him a Leo. So very bold, very intense, very theatrical, loves attention. And in some twisted way, Charles would come to embody all of that, but not in the way that anyone hopes for their child. Charles wasn't raised by his birth parents. Just 3 weeks after he entered the world, he was actually adopted from an orphanage by a couple named Fred and Dell Albright. To outsiders, they were very upstanding and devoted people, but behind the picket fence was a home ruled by fear and control, almost entirely at the hands of Dell, his mother. Dell Albright was a force of nature, very domineering, deeply anxious, and obsessively clean. She believed that she was molding Charles into the perfect son, and later, the perfect man. But her taxes, I don't think she was worried about her taxes, but her tactics were more aligned with torture than parenting. If Charles didn't want to take a nap as a toddler, Dell used to tie him to his bed. If he refused to drink his milk, she beat him. Disobedience earned him hours, locked alone in a dark room. To Dell, this wasn't abuse. This was just parenting, structure, discipline. In her eyes, she wasn't a tyrant. She was a savior. She also happened to be terrified of germs. Now, I don't like germs either. I'm a teacher, though. I kind of deal with them on a daily basis. Kids are like little germ factories. They just are. They're a petri dish of nasty. It just comes with the territory. So if you don't like germs and you have kids, you're going to have to get over that at some point. I don't know what to tell you. Dell's anxiety about germs, though, was over the top. That anxiety became Charles's prison. He wasn't allowed to touch dirt, like at all. You know, the thing that little boys love the most to play in, he couldn't touch it. Even playing in the backyard required a rope tethered to him to prevent him from wandering near the ground. Yes, he would be tied to a rope so that he couldn't play in the dirt. Dell made him change his clothes multiple times a day, and she banned all milk except goat's milk. So Dell, naturally, she kept a goat in the backyard for his exclusive use. Can someone please explain to me why the goat milk? Why? Is it cleaner than cow milk? It I don't know what the reasoning behind that was. Okay. Dell was really weird about public bathrooms too. They were completely off limits. Now, I've been in some real gross public bathrooms, and I don't blame her for this one, but sometimes when you gotta go, you gotta go. And you can just like put down toilet paper on the seat or one of those covers. It's fine, right? It's fine. There are ways to go. But she told Charles that sitting on a toilet seat could actually give him crabs. Of all the things to tell your child, she didn't just say, don't sit on that because it's dirty. She said, you're going to get crabs. I'm sorry. I don't know what. It's so funny to me. It's not funny, but it is at the same time. I'm laughing because it's so insane. It's just insane. Okay, so crabs. Because of this, Charles developed a lifelong fear of toilets. He would never sit on one again, probably not even his own. But aside from that, perhaps the darkest ritual that Dell imposed came under the guise of learning, or her idea of the word. She would take young Charles to local hospitals to visit the terminally ill. She told him that this is what happened to people who didn't stay clean, that this was where you ended up if you didn't obey. What kind of fuckery is that? Can you imagine? Like, I get visiting kids, like candy striping and stuff like that, like visiting kids in the hospital who might be sick, like reading to them, bringing them toys, bringing them joy. That was not this. This was a scare tactic. Dell was like, if you don't listen to mommy, you're going to end up in the hospital terminally ill, just like these people. You better listen to me and don't sit on toilets or you're going to get crabs. You're basically being told that death was the consequence of dirty hands or playing outside. So it's no surprise that Charles grew up quite traumatized. But even in this chaotic, tightly wound world, there was one space where he and his mother actually bonded. And no, it wasn't something cute. It was taxidermy. It started when Charles was 11. Dell bought him his first rifle and took him hunting. So yeah, Charles couldn't play in the dirt, couldn't play outside. He was tethered to things so that he didn't get dirty. But sure, go ahead. Go hunt some animals and then we'll take out their insides and taxidermy them. We'll stuff them because that's not dirty. Like what? Lady. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe she thought it would make him tough because she wanted him to be a big, strong man. Or maybe it was just another form of control. I have no idea. After Charles brought home his first kill, Dell taught him how to preserve it. Together, they practiced taxidermy. Oh joy. Dell would bring home live pigeons in cages, and then she'd hand them over to Charles, who would kill them and carefully slit their skulls, scoop out their brain matter, and finally remove the eyes. He used a spoon at first and then moved to surgical blades. Sounds so clean. And this wasn't just a hobby. It became a fascination. And for Charles, the act of removing the eyes was the most satisfying part. He became obsessed, not just with the process, but with the idea of eyes themselves, how they held life, and how removing them took it away. Traditionally, taxidermists replace the eyes with glass replicas. They're very realistic and expressive and expensive and also creepy. Charles was captivated by them. He would stare at the displays in shop windows, but Dell, ever so frugal Dell, refused to buy the glass eyes. Instead, she made him use buttons where the eyes once were. Okay, Coraline, Charles hated it. He said it made the animals look blind and soulless. Soulless is right. All I think of is Coraline. That movie's actually kind of scary. So he wasn't allowed to use the glass eyes. He had to use the buttons. And that is when the resentment began to fester, not just toward the process of taxidermy, but also toward his mother. According to Charles, Dell had taken the one thing he enjoyed and denied him the tools to do it properly. Charles claims that removing the eyes gave him comfort. That obsession would never leave him. It would actually grow and mutate and one day take over his entire life. Charles Albright may have grown up in a home shaped by discipline and strict expectations, but when he reached his teenage years, the pressure boiled over. And when it didn't come out as a quiet little breakdown. It exploded as rebellion. She didn't just control his cleanliness and lack of glass eyeballs, she was also extremely controlling when it came to his education. Charles was really intelligent. At school, he was bright. He was so intelligent actually that he skipped 2 grades. But brilliance wasn't enough for his mom. She demanded perfection. Every hour that he was not in class was filled with piano practice, advanced reading, and relentless drills. Eventually, Charles pushed back. So this is where the rebellion comes in. Because if you push a kid like that, they're going to rebel. He became the class clown. He was always ready with a joke or a prank. His antics made him very popular with his classmates and gave him a new sense of power. He could make people laugh. He could make them like him. But underneath the charm, Charles was acting out in much darker ways. He wasn't just pulling pranks. He was stealing from teachers, damaging property, and even lit a teacher's dress on fire during class. Another time, he grabbed scissors and cut a chunk out of a girl's ponytail. The worst part of this, you guys, is that somehow he always got away with it. It was like, oh, boys will be boys. When he did get in trouble, it was his smooth talking confidence or his freaking mom storming up into the school in his defense because Charles learned very early on that he could push limits without facing real consequences. Since his mom wanted him to be perfect, she pushed back so hard anytime he got in trouble. She was like, not my Charles, not my baby, not my angel. He would never do that. So he just never got in trouble. His mom always bailed him out. This dangerous lesson that his mother was teaching him and that these other adults were teaching him, that he was above the rules, this would stick with him for life. As Charles entered adolescence, his mother's control took a more personal turn. She often warned him to not become like his father, someone she described as impulsive and overly demanding. She had very private and uncomfortable stories that she shared with her teenage son, the kind of stories that created very deep confusion and shame around normal development. Basically, she told Charles that his father was a sex fiend and that she was disgusted by how he was constantly grabbing at her. I don't know why you would tell your teenage son that. I don't feel they need to know that information. And if you don't like it, move out. You can do that. Your son is not your therapist. So because Dell had so much resentment against her own husband that she described as disgusting and animalistic, she didn't just tell Charles to not become like his father, she enforced. She monitored his early dates and insisted he be home by 8 p.m. every single night. The message was loud and clear. The desire was dangerous. Women were dangerous. Relationships were wrong. And so Charles developed a very distorted view of romance and intimacy, something that he would carry into his adulthood in some very unsettling ways. Basically, Dell was teaching him that women were the devil, that women were dirty, and he shouldn't have any kind of relationship with women. Ugh, this sounds like Ed Gein's mom. If you guys know Ed Gein's life story, you know that it was also very sad and that she was really obsessed with women being dirty as well. Just fucking weird. Like, you're a woman. What do you mean? So all of this was very confusing to Charles, and at 16, when he graduated high school and left home for the first time to attend college in Texas, without Dell's constant supervision, he just spiraled out of control. And he was 16. 16-year-olds do dumb stuff already. So Charles would ditch his classes, he pulled pranks, and eventually he crossed a much more serious line. Charles actually ended up losing his virginity to a woman he had paid. So he lost his virginity to a sex worker on a dare from his friends. The experience left him wrecked with guilt, not just because of what he had done, but because of what he'd been taught to believe about it. So for him, this was like the most disturbing way to lose it. And rather than owning his decision or growing from it, Charles turned that guilt outward. He began to develop a very deep, irrational bitterness, particularly toward women who worked in that world. It became a fixation. That same year, he was arrested for stealing hundreds of dollars worth of merchandise from a local store. His college suspended him, and he had to appear in court. Dell showed up, of course, as always, begging the judge to punish her instead of her son. But this time, the plea didn't work. Charles was sentenced to a year in jail. his first true consequence. Thank God, right? Like, thank God somebody said, no, sorry, mommy, you can't get him out of this one. He has to go to jail, which he should. Charles kept a very low profile behind bars, no stunts, no charm, and after serving his sentence, he returned to school. But nothing had changed. He was still disruptive, he was still stealing, and still chasing attention. And now another obsession from his past was creeping back in. Charles began revisiting his childhood fascination with eyeballs, something he had first discovered through taxidermy with his mother. But this time, it wasn't part of any scientific curiosity. He was taking friends into the woods, catching small animals, and showing them how to remove the eyes. It was like a game to him. I hate that. A little bit of a trigger warning for this next sentence. One classmate recalled him holding a frog and squeezing it until the eyes nearly popped from its skull. Others remembered jars in his dorm filled with unsettling specimens. It was definitely bizarre and unsettling behavior, but somehow people still just let it slide. They were like, oh, that's just Charles. He's real weird. He is real kooky, that guy. Guys, I hate to break it to you. That is not kooky. That is psychotic. Not normal behavior. In one particularly twisted prank, after his roommate broke up with his girlfriend, Charles actually took photos of the ex-girlfriend and cut out her eyes in the pictures and then plastered them all over the roommate's side of the room, like all over the dorm. And, there's more. Later, when the guy dated someone new, Charles stuck the same cutout eyes onto the new girlfriend's pictures. The roommate was so mad. He was so furious, and rightly so. That's really weird behavior. And eventually, Charles was actually expelled from school. He was expelled from college because he was stealing aquariums. I couldn't tell you why. I don't know why he chose to steal aquariums. Hopefully not to put specimens in. I don't know. It's all so bizarre. It's so weird. The school was actually too embarrassed to press charges, but they quietly forced Charles out. After leaving college, Charles moved in with his girlfriend, Betty. They actually got married and they had a daughter. And for the next decade, things appeared pretty quiet from the outside. No major incidents, no arrests. It seemed like Charles had finally kind of settled into adulthood. But beneath that quiet exterior, things were shifting. And all at once, it started to unravel because Charles discovered that he was adopted. Suddenly, he was consumed with questions. Who were they? Why had they given him up? What were their names? And actually, no one in his family would answer his questions. So Charles filled in the blanks himself. And what he decided, without evidence, was that his birth mother had been a sex worker. He just decided that must have been what she was. And maybe it was projection, maybe it was resentment, or maybe it was just a convenient scapegoat for everything he hated about himself and what he had been taught growing up. Whatever the reason, that idea lodged into his brain and took root. Now, after going through that whole journey, he decided he was going to walk out on his family. That's right. He decided quite abruptly that he was just bored. He said he was bored of being a husband, bored of being a father, so he left. No warning, no discussion. He moved to a new town and cut off contact with his wife and daughter entirely, which actually I think is a blessing. Like, thank God. Was it shitty of him to do? Absolutely. Yes. But considering what he does in the future, best case scenario for that child. So after he left his family, Charles reinvented himself. He became an artist, but not in the traditional sense. He offered custom portraits. And what was his specialty? Guys, what do you think it was? It was the thing that fascinated him most. Eyeballs. He wanted to draw people's faces, yes, but always focused almost obsessively on their eyes. The depth, the color, the expression. It was like his childhood fixation had returned and dressed up in something more socially acceptable. Around this time, he actually decided that the next step in his life should be to fake a college degree. Charles had never completed his own higher education. He'd been kicked out of college. But he didn't let that stop him. No way, Jose. He forged a bachelor's degree, complete with a transcript and academic honors. And unbelievably, it worked. He landed a teaching job at a local high school. And the wild part, he was good at it. I know. I don't like to hear it any more than you do, but he was apparently very good at what he did. The students really liked him. Colleagues respected him. He had charm, he had intelligence, and he just had a natural ability to lead. He was a Leo. It looked like he'd turned his life around. But of course, the truth eventually came out because you can't keep up that charade forever. Someone's gonna find out. When the school discovered that he faked his credentials, he was immediately fired. And that sent Charles into a strange cycle of identity hopping. Some of us like bar hopping, Charles liked job hopping. This guy had the weirdest set of jobs. Like just none of them connected in any way. He was a hairdresser at one point, an aerospace designer, and claimed to have trained as a bullfighter. Hairdresser and aerospace designer by day, bullfighter by night. By his 50s, the cracks had fully formed. And then a major rupture in his life. His mother, Dell, passed away. Now, this woman had been not just his mother, right? This was his controller, his protector, his tormentor. And she passed away suddenly. And despite all the ways she traumatized him in his life, Charles was devastated. Without her, something in him just became completely unglued. He spiraled hard. His bitterness resurfaced, and he became increasingly vocal about his hatred, particularly towards sex workers. He ranted to friends about it. He made dark jokes. He said things that, in hindsight, should have raised every single red flag in everyone's mind. He said some disgusting things, and he was obsessed with the sex workers. It's like every single conversation he had with people came back to sex work. If someone is that obsessed with something, there's a problem. After the sudden death of his mother, Dell, something in Charles truly snapped. The emotional leash that tethered him, as twisted as it was completely gone. And without it, the mask began to crack. Still, though, at this time, to most people, Charles looked normal. He was still charming, still educated sounding, articulate, full of stories. And not long after Dell's death, he met someone new, a woman named Dixie. They got married, moved in together, and from the outside, again, looked like second chance of domestic life, looked like perfect little family. But behind closed doors, Charles was hiding another reality. He actually wasn't working. He wasn't helping with bills. He was living entirely off of Dixie's income and quietly driving them both into debt. At night, he would tell her that he was out delivering. Sorry, it just makes me laugh every time I read it. He said, "Dixie, I won't be home tonight because I have to go deliver newspapers." That was his cover story. But the truth was that he was actually cruising the Dallas red light district multiple nights a week, visiting sex workers and becoming a regular face in the area. So we know where this is going, unfortunately. At first, though, the girls who encountered him said he was polite, that he was generous even. He gave extra cash, he brought warm meals, he handed out gifts, he was soft-spoken, and he smiled easily, soft, easy smile. But that surface level kindness wasn't kindness at all. It was bait and it was bullshit. Because over time, the charm wore off and the cruelty emerged pretty quickly. Charles began to change. The encounters that he had with the sex workers turned very violent. He demanded very rough, aggressive behavior from the girls, and if they didn't do what he wanted, he would beat them. I don't care what your thoughts are about sex workers. They do not deserve to be treated that way. No human does. It's disgusting what he did to these women. Remember, even though this is considered a quote unquote high risk job, that does not mean low priority. They're still human and they still deserve respect. Several women later described Charles as very physically abusive, someone who hit and degraded them during their time together. I'm not going to go too far into detail with what he did to these poor women, but I'm just going to mention a few things. One incident actually involved him tying two women to a motel bed and whipping them with a belt and an extension cord. And no, that was not part of the deal. They did not consent to that. They hadn't agreed to any of it, and they were terrified. They thought that they were going to die. But Charles wasn't just reenacting violent fantasies, he was revisiting something far more personal. One detail stuck out. He always tied his victims to the bed. And if that sounds familiar, it should. Charles had been tied to a bed as a child when he misbehaved. It was how Dell punished him when he would refuse to nap. It's hard not to see the echoes of that trauma playing out in the way that he was now controlling others. And that obsession he had with eyeballs, that hadn't gone away either. One day, Charles met a young woman that he was manipulating. It was a teenager that he met at a local mall. She later described how he just talked obsessively about eyeballs, how he showed her his collection of X-Acto knives and explained in full detail how to remove animal eyeballs and then would demand sex afterward. This girl was terrified of him. She believed that he was capable of killing her. And remember, this was a child, a teenager that he found and groomed and manipulated. And you know what? This wasn't even the first time that Charles involved himself with a minor, because apparently he was a devout Catholic and a dedicated member of the St. Bernard's Catholic Church in East Dallas, where he sang in the choir. And one day, while visiting with friends who were church members, he sexually molested their 9-year-old daughter. The family reported him when they found out, and Charles pled guilty to knowingly and intentionally engaging in deviant sexual intercourse, receiving a sentence of 10 years probation. No jail time. If he had gotten some jail time, maybe all of this could have been avoided, because he went on to also victimize this young girl. It's just ridiculous. Meanwhile, Charles kept up appearances. He played on a local softball team, he joked with his neighbors, and he wore the same easy grin he always had. But soon, his teammates noticed a shift in his behavior. He became more aggressive and very volatile. No matter what they were talking about, he always found a way to bring the conversation back to one subject. Any takers? Not eyeballs. Good try. Not eyeballs. Those of you who said sex workers, you were right. He just would not shut up about sex workers. He didn't just talk about them, he raged about them. He said he hated them, the world would be better off without them, and his teammates just, again, all these fucking people just brushing it off. Oh, that's just Charles being weird. He's just a weird guy. No. If someone is talking that violently about a group of people or one person or animals, I don't care. If they're talking that violently, it's not a joke. Please take it seriously. So with all of this quote unquote joking that he was doing, he was really laying the groundwork. He wasn't just thinking about violence anymore. He was planning it. On the evening of December 13th, 1990, Charles Albright made the move from violent fantasy to something far more real. He headed into the Dallas Red Light District, very familiar territory by now, and he picked up two women, 33-year-old Mary Pratt and 26-year-old Veronica Rodriguez. Both were known in the area. Both had histories marked by hardship and addiction, unfortunately. And both trusted Charles enough, at least at first, to get in his car. That was just part of their job. They're just trying to make a living. Charles took them to a secluded field. It was dark, empty, and isolated, perfect for what he had planned. He laid down a blanket and he asked for sex. The women agreed, but partway through, the mood shifted. Suddenly, Charles turned on Veronica. He struck her in the head, held her down, and assaulted her. It wasn't just force, it was fury. I'm not going to go into full detail. Veronica fought back, though. She kicked, she screamed, and somehow she got free. She ran into the night and she didn't stop. Mary, unfortunately, stayed behind, just paralyzed by fear. And that's when Charles pulled out a gun and shot her in the back of the head. Mary Pratt was killed instantly. And what he did next would become his signature move. With surgical precision, Charles pulled out an X-Acto knife, one of many in his collection, and began removing her eyes. Yep, I know. He didn't rush. He wasn't in a panic. He took his time, as if he were back in his childhood desk doing taxidermy. He knew exactly what he was doing, severing the optical nerve, detaching the tissues, making sure the eyes remained intact. It took nearly an hour. When he was finished, he carefully pocketed the eyes and placed her body in the car. But that wasn't enough for Charles. He drove Mary's body into a neighborhood not far from his own, and in a grotesque final act, he posed her in the street. So this part does get a little bit graphic. He pulled down her pants, lifted her shirt to expose her chest, and arranged her body deliberately like a message. And then he drove away, calm and collected. He even took the time to close her eyelids, covering up the fact that her eyes were missing. By morning, two teenagers, oh my God, I still can't believe it was teenagers who found this woman, these poor kids. Two teenagers discovered her body, and the image of Mary Pratt haunted these poor children and the responding officers forever. Meanwhile, the other woman, Veronica, had gone straight to the police. Thank God. She told them everything, that Charles had assaulted her, that he'd snapped out of nowhere, and that she'd run for her life. But unfortunately, the police didn't believe her. Veronica had sort of a reputation for exaggerating the truth. She also was a sex worker. I mean, that was something that at the time made law enforcement very quick to dismiss things that they brought to their attention. They brushed it off as just another story. They really did not take these women seriously at all. It's literally your job as a police officer to just go check it out. Like, worst that could happen is that she lied. Yeah, she lied. That's it. That's the worst that could happen. Maybe you feel like you wasted your time. If you don't investigate it, then the worst that can happen is what just happened. Just like do your job. Just do your job. So when the police showed up and found the body, they did not connect the dots at all. And because of that, Charles Albright, who had just murdered his first known victim and taken her eyes as a trophy, wasn't even on their radar. For now, he'd gotten away with it, and he wasn't finished. 2 months after Mary Pratt's murder, Charles Albright struck again. On February 8th, 1991, Charles went back to the Dallas Red Light District. On that evening, he met a 27-year-old named Susan Peterson. Susan had been in survival mode for most of her adult life. She had also struggled with addiction, and sex work had become her means of getting by. On this night, when she got into Charles Albright's car, she knew who he was, and this wasn't her first encounter with him. In fact, Susan had been one of the two women that Charles had previously tied to a motel bed and assaulted. She probably needed the money. Maybe she thought it would be different this time. He drove her to the same secluded field where he had murdered Mary Pratt. He laid out the same blanket and he asked for the same act. And then, mid-encounter, just like before, Charles pulled out a gun and shot Susan in the stomach. She collapsed backwards, gasping, trying to comprehend what had just happened. Then he shot her again, this time in the chest. But she was still clinging to life. She was holding on, and this made Charles extremely angry. So he aimed once more and fired a final shot point blank into her head. Just like that, Susan Peterson was gone. 27. She was 27. Just a baby. And then Charles did his usual ritual. He removed her eyes with the same exact precision as before, spending nearly an hour in that open field, methodically carving them from her skull. When he finished, he placed her body in his car and drove back to the same neighborhood where he dumped Mary. He again posed Susan's body in the exact same way, pants pulled down, shirt lifted, chest exposed for shock factor. Only this time, he added something new. He pulled out a clump of her hair and laid it across her chest. And no one knows why. He never explained. So we don't know if it was symbolic or personal or just another weird part of his dark fantasy playing out in his mind. He left Susan there, staged and exposed. And once again, police were shocked by what they saw. And this time, it didn't take long for them to notice a pattern. Both women were sex workers. Both had been killed elsewhere and dumped after death. Both had been posed, and most disturbingly, both had had their eyeballs surgically removed. That's not the kind of detail law enforcement sees every day. And they could tell that this wasn't a random attack. This was methodical, intentional, and ritualistic. The Dallas Police Department called in the FBI because now they knew they were dealing with a serial killer. Agents hit the streets, they canvassed the red light district, they interviewed dozens of women, and again, one name kept coming up: Charles Albright. Sex workers described him as weird, obsessive. Some mentioned his fascination with X-Acto knives and eyeballs. Others said that he could turn aggressive, violent, and even cruel within seconds. But for reasons that still baffle investigators to this day, those statements, they were dismissed. Yeah, they said, okay, thank you so much. And that was it. So Charles wasn't arrested. He wasn't even questioned. We're just not going to take that seriously? Okay. So once again, despite the pattern, despite the warnings, despite the mounting bodies, Charles Albright walked away unscathed. But his compulsion wasn't easing. He was actually accelerating, which we see a lot in these types of serial killers. After the murder of Susan Peterson, Charles didn't wait long. Before, he had a cool-off period of about 2 months, and now it was practically non-existent. His control was slipping, and it was only a matter of time before someone noticed. That moment nearly came in March of 1991. Charles had returned to his hunting ground, the Dallas Red Light District, and this time, his target was a 20-year-old girl, Tina Connolly. And I say girl because, she's 20 years old. Her frontal lobe isn't even fully developed yet. Guys, she's a baby. She knew Charles. He'd actually been a client of hers before and was regular enough that she likely just didn't hesitate when she saw him pull up. It doesn't sound like she'd had any traumatic experiences with him previously like the other women had. So he took her to the same isolated field. He laid down his blanket and he made the same request. But almost immediately, things felt off. As Tina began performing the act, Charles turned very aggressive. He reached out, grabbed her by the hair, and started yanking with force, pulling it out in clumps and throwing it on the ground, just pulling out her hair. Then, without a word, he turned and walked back to his car. Tina stayed on the blanket, confused and traumatized, but from the passenger side, she heard a sound she would never forget: the clinking of metal. Charles was rummaging through the glove box, and something about the way he moved set off every alarm in her body. The initial shock wore off, and she booked it. She was barefoot and terrified, but she took off across that field, and she made it. She escaped. To this day, we don't know if she ever officially reported what happened to the police. Maybe she didn't trust them. After all, law enforcement hadn't exactly shown a track record of protecting women in their line of work, but whether or not she said something, her escape would later become crucial. And Charles was furious. His routine had been broken, he'd lost control, and he couldn't afford another failed attempt. So just a week later, he went looking again. This time, he picked up 37-year-old Brenda White. When she got into his car, Charles told her that they were going to the field. Brenda stopped him immediately. She said, "No, that's not how I work." She explained that she only saw clients in a motel by her own rule in her own space. But Charles refused. He kept driving toward the field. And that's when Brenda reached into her purse, pulled out a can of pepper spray, and blasted that motherfucker right in the face. Brenda, when I read that, when I was doing my research and I read that, I was like, oh, hell yeah. Go, Brenda. The second that pepper spray hit his face, she flung open the passenger door and bolted into the night. She, too, survived Charles Albright, and he was livid. He was unraveling. His control over his victims, his control over the ritual was slipping away. He was becoming really sloppy. 2 women had escaped in the span of a week. He was so angry. He was restless, and he was desperate. Just a few days later, Charles Albright would commit what became his final known murder. But this time, he'd make a mistake. Thank God. On March 19th, 1991, in the very early morning hours, Charles Albright cruised into the red light district once again. The city was quiet, the streets were empty, and Charles was hunting his next victim. This time, he picked up 45-year-old Shirley Williams. Shirley had been through her share of struggles, but she was also a mother. She had 2 adult children who loved her very deeply. She was very cautious, very smart when it came to her line of work, but unfortunately, on this very cold, rainy night, she got into Charles's car. He drove her, as always, to the same secluded field. But something was different this time. Maybe it was the pressure from the recent field attacks. Maybe it was how close daylight was creeping in. Whatever it was, Charles was very rushed. He laid out the blanket and asked Shirley to remove all her clothes before performing the act. Despite the freezing rain, she did as he asked. And then, with no hesitation, Charles pulled out his gun, and this is awful. Charles Albright shot her in the face. There was no buildup, no pause. He gave Shirley no chance to react at all. And just like that, she was gone. But here's where everything started to come undone. Normally, Charles would spend nearly an hour meticulously removing his victim's eyes. In the past, he had been very careful, very clinical, and surgical even. But on this day, he didn't have that kind of time. The sun was already coming up, people would be out and about soon, and the neighborhood wasn't far. So he had to move fast. So instead of his usual precision, he used his knife to tear into Shirley's face. It was extremely rushed and sloppy, and in his frantic state, he made a crucial mistake. He left the blade behind. His X-Acto knife was still embedded in her cheek when he dumped her body. And he wasn't careful about the dumping either. Instead of driving back to his usual neighborhood, Charles dropped Shirley's body in a random residential area. He didn't pose her, he didn't arrange her clothes, he barely had time to stage anything. The only thing consistent with the others, her eyes were missing. But this time, Charles left behind a mess. And in this mess, thank goodness, was evidence. Shirley's body was discovered very quickly. And unlike the previous victims, there was no ambiguity. Police knew immediately that they were looking at the work of the same killer. The signature was there, the wounds, the missing eyes, but this time they had more than just a pattern. They had a weapon. The blade that was left in Shirley's cheek was a game changer. It was actual physical evidence, something to trace, something to test. Investigators began retracing their steps, talking again to the people they'd previously ignored. And when they returned to the red light district, a familiar name came up again, Charles Albright. And finally, those stories that police were just brushing aside for months started coming back into focus. Women who had once been ignored were now being taken very seriously. Detectives returned to the streets and listened, truly listened, for the first time. This wasn't just a familiar face to these women. He was the man multiple women had warned them about a man obsessed with knives, obsessed with eyeballs, and extremely violent and controlling. And now someone was coming forward. Brenda White. Remember Brenda? She was the one who sprayed Charles with pepper spray. Brenda came forward after Shirley's murder and told the detectives about her terrifying escape. She explained how Charles had tried to take her to that same field, how he refused to stop the car, and how she sprayed him with pepper spray and ran. She gave them his name and she picked him out of a lineup. Then came Veronica Rodriguez. You might remember Veronica from months earlier. She was the woman who fled the scene the night that Charles killed Mary Pratt. Back then, she told her story and no one believed her. She was the one that they said had a reputation for exaggerating the truth. But now they were listening. Veronica had known Charles. He'd been a regular client. She knew his face. She, too, picked him out of a lineup. With 2 eyewitness identifications and a mounting suspicion, police finally made their move. Charles Albright was arrested at his home. When investigators brought him in, he denied everything. He was calm, composed, even very friendly, which makes me want to just punch him in the face. It was the same charm he'd used his entire life on teachers, on classmates, on friends, and now on detectives. But the lies didn't end with him. His wife, Dixie, showed up with a full defense strategy. Dixie girl, what are you doing? Why are you providing an alibi for this man? She provided alibis for every single attack and murder. Every night he was out, she said, oh, he was home, or he was on his paper route, or oh, he was home watching TV. She insisted he couldn't have done it. Dixie, I'm gonna need you to do better, okay? Dixie had become a near mirror image of Dell, Charles's mother, always defending him, always covering for him, always convinced of his innocence. But the police were not relying on alibis anymore. They needed hard evidence. So they decided that they were going to go search Charles's home. When they got to his house, they looked everywhere. The police actually searched his residence 6 times. And although still no eyeballs were found, they did find an alarming amount of weird things, just bizarre and concerning things. He had a ton of woodworking stuff and X-Acto blades throughout the home. He had dozens of true crime books, a copy of Grey's Anatomy, hundreds, and I mean hundreds of photos of women's eyes taken at close-up range. He had dolls and mannequins and face masks. And then this one really just solidified it for me. He had newspaper clippings of the 3 murders of the eyeless sex workers and a hidden compartment behind the fireplace mantle filled with rifles and pistols. Now, none of those were found to be the murder weapons used in the killings, but officers had also found jars of animal parts and dozens of taxidermy animals in a rented storage unit. Again, no human eyeballs were found, and while the circumstantial evidence against Albright kept building, they had very little to connect him to the actual murders. So the question remained, where were the eyes? They really needed this to help them solidify this case. If he had kept the eyes, he'd hidden them very well. But in the back of his car, they found something else. Blankets. The same blankets he used to lay out in that secluded field. Forensics pulled hair and other biological evidence from those blankets belonging to all 3 victims: Mary Pratt, Susan Peterson, and Shirley Williams. It was a breakthrough. The first real forensic link tying Charles to the murders. But as we know in these stories, it's not always a slam dunk. Charles had been known to frequent sex workers, and that fact was not a secret. His defense could argue that the presence of their DNA, their hair, even the blood, apparently didn't prove murder, that it just proved contact. So police needed more. They needed the crime scene. That's when Tina Connolly came forward. Remember her? She was the one who escaped when Charles started yanking her hair out during an encounter in the field. She hadn't come forward before because, she wasn't sure if it would matter. But now, with bodies piling up, she realized her story might help stop him. So Tina led detectives to the exact field that Charles had taken her to. It was the same field where all 3 victims had been assaulted and killed. And there, investigators found something critical. Shirley Williams's bloody clothes. They were still on the ground, right where Charles had left them. They were soaked with her blood and with Charles Albright's DNA. Bam! They got him. That was the connection they needed. Now, the police had physical evidence, eyewitness testimony, and a known crime scene. Charles Albright was formally charged with the murders of Mary Pratt, Susan Peterson, and Shirley Williams. There was also a 4th charge briefly considered, linked to a woman named Rhonda Bowie. Her murder had occurred before Mary's and bore some similarities, but Rhonda's eyes had not been removed, and without enough evidence, that charge was dropped. So I can see why they dropped that. Unfortunately, it's not uncommon for these things to happen to women in sex work. It's disgusting that people think that they can just take someone's life. It's even more disgusting that they think they can do it and get away with it because someone's a sex worker. Again, I say, high risk is not low priority. Please look after your fellow humans. So with the charges in relation to Rhonda Bowie being dropped, the trial was going to come up soon. And already, one thing was very clear. For the first time in his life, Charles Albright couldn't charm his way out. By the end of 1991, Charles, who was once known as a brilliant student, a charming teacher, and a local softball player, was now something far more sinister. The man accused of surgically removing the eyes of 3 women. The press had already dubbed him the eyeball killer. When the trial began, Charles stuck to his script. He was innocent. He was calm. He was polished and persuasive. He smiled in the courtroom. He joked with his attorneys. He told story after story, each one tailored to confuse, distract, or cast doubt. His wife, Dixie, took the stand to defend him. She spoke about his intelligence, his kindness. She claimed he was incapable of murder. Okay, I think these women would disagree. He probably wasn't violent towards you because you weren't a sex worker. That was his victim profile. But prosecutors had other stories to tell. They had hair and biological evidence found in the blanket in his car. They had the blood-soaked clothing of Shirley Williams discovered in the exact field where she'd been killed, with Charles's DNA on it. They had 2 survivors, Brenda White and Tina Connolly, who bravely came forward to share what they had escaped during the trial. Still, though, the defense pushed back. When it came to the murders of Mary Pratt and Susan Peterson, the jury hesitated. I know. I don't get it either. The evidence, mostly hair found on the shared blankets, just wasn't enough for them. It wasn't enough to convince them beyond a reasonable doubt. After all, Charles had admitted to frequenting sex workers. His defense argued that the DNA proved nothing more than physical contact. Shockingly, Charles was found not guilty of those 2 murders. But when it came to Shirley Williams, the story changed. The jury saw the field, they saw the DNA, they saw the blood on her clothes, and the X-Acto knife left lodged into her cheek. That for them was enough. Finally, Charles Albright was found guilty of the murder of Shirley Williams and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In the end, he was only convicted of 1 murder, just Shirley, but many, including myself, believe, and with good reason, that he was responsible for far more. How did they think, oh, no, there's no way he killed these other women. Their eyeballs were removed, and he's obsessed with eyeballs, but probably not him. Now, there's one detail, though, that still haunts every person involved in this case. One mystery that was never solved was where are the eyeballs. Despite exhaustive searches of his home, his car, and every property he'd ever lived on, authorities never recovered the eyes of Mary Pratt, Susan Peterson, or Shirley Williams. They were surgically removed with care, intentionally preserved. But where the hell did they end up? No one knows. Some believe that Charles kept them, that they were his trophies, his masterpieces, his private collection, tucked away in jars or hidden somewhere that no one's thought to look. This is common with serial killers. They collect trophies. Sometimes they're found, other times they're not, or sometimes some of them are found and the rest aren't. Others think he may have destroyed them. He may have buried them, dissolved them, or used them for something even more disturbing. And then there's a theory rooted in the very origin of his obsession: taxidermy. There are theories that maybe the eyes were meant to replace the buttons from childhood, the ones that made the animals look, quote unquote, blind. Maybe these real human eyes were his final fix, his ultimate solution to the one thing Dell never let him have. And we may never know, but some people think that maybe there's a taxidermied creature of some kind out there with these eyeballs inside of them. It's not an impossible theory, but where are those animals? We may never know, guys. In prison, Charles Albright quickly became, God, I hate to say it, he became popular. He was very friendly and charismatic, the same way he'd always been, making friends easily. Excuse me while I go vomit. Charles maintained contact with supporters on the outside. Why do these guys always have supporters on the outside? It's like the girls who were like fangirling over Richard Ramirez and Charles Manson. Ladies, do better. Go to therapy. Come on. What the fuck? Even behind bars, he never stopped claiming his innocence. He was like, I'm an innocent man. I didn't do it. And I think he maybe did talk like that because he was from Texas, but I don't know. He filed appeal after appeal. All of them failed. They were like, nah, dude. Charles Albright ended up dying in prison on August 22nd, 2020, at the age of 87. The official cause? Natural causes. He went to the grave still denying what so many are certain he did. So that piece of shit got to live till he was 87. Cool, cool, cool. To this day, what remains arguably the most painful about this case, aside from the violence itself, is how little we know about the women whose lives were stolen. Mary Pratt, all we know is that she was 33. She'd had a difficult life, but you know what? She still had time to live it and turn it around. She never got to because Charles decided she didn't deserve that chance. Susan Peterson, guys, she was only 27. I'm sure all of these women had families, and we don't know anything about them. Shirley Williams was 45. We do know that she was a mother of 2 adult children who loved her very much. She was a woman who had people that cared for her and mourned her loss. These women were more than their circumstances, more than their final moments. They deserved better from society, from law enforcement, from all of us, frankly. This story, Charles Albright's case is just full of red flags. I know some people have opinions about this story and feel that maybe he was wrongly convicted. I feel personally, and you don't have to agree with me, but I feel it's just too specific to be random. The obsession with eyes, his background in taxidermy, the stuff they found in his house, especially those newspaper clippings. Usually serial killers do stuff like that. They like follow the cases and keep up with everything and they collect little trophies. And the eyeballs were removed so precisely. It's just a lot of coincidences stacked together. And I know it is important to mention that some of the evidence was largely circumstantial and the forensics, they were not airtight. For example, it was later determined that some of the hair samples were inconclusive. But the bloody clothes and his alleged behavioral signature, the surgical eye removal and posing the victims, it just felt deeply personal. That's not something a random killer would do unless they had the same bizarre fixation. I mean, certainly come to your own conclusions here. I think you all know where I stand on this case, but you guys have your own opinions, and that's fine. And I understand why some may have a hard time saying if he was 100% guilty or not, because some of the evidence was inconclusive. To me, he just seems like, he lied so much. Like, how can we believe anything he says? And the fact that he just talked incessantly about sex workers and then just all the ways his mother traumatized him. I mean, come on, guys. He's not the first serial killer with mommy issues. We've seen this before. It's just the psychological aspect that raises those red flags for me personally. Like how many people are, walking around obsessed with eyeballs, anatomy, collecting fake diplomas while living in Dallas during a string of eerily specific murders. So this one, for me, I feel I know where I stand, regardless of, if he was guilty or not. He molested a 9-year-old girl, so he's still a piece of shit. I would love to hear your thoughts about it. Let me know what you guys think. I'm always open to criticism, perspective. I like to have conversations about these sorts of things, and I try to be as respectful as I can to other people's opinions. I know I joked in the last episode about like, don't DM me with your debunkings and that kind of stuff. That's different. Those people were kind of being rude. They were being assholes. And if you're listening, I'm sorry, but you were being really disrespectful in your DM. You weren't presenting it in a nice way. So that's why I said that. We can have like productive discussions about these things in a nice way without degrading somebody's opinion. I think that that's very possible as adults. We can talk like adults. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. Always be respectful in your comments, your DMs. Otherwise, I'm just not going to respond to you. So, yeah, that, my friends, is the story of Charles Albright, the eyeball killer. And I really wish I had more information about the victims. If anybody has more about the victims, please, please, please tag me or email it to me. Let me know. I would love to do them more justice than had been done to them in their lives. So, on a more positive note, it's so hard to segue like out of these topics when they're heavy like this. But if you haven't yet, go follow the podcast on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram. If you liked this episode or any of the episodes, share them with your friends. Share them with your spooky friends, your true crime friends, anyone that you feel would be interested in these stories. If you have any stories that you would like me to cover, send them to me. I've had people send me a few already. If you're looking for new t-shirts, new hats, new stickers, go purchase some merch from the website. Go show it some love. Thank you for listening. Thank you for all of your support. Seriously, you guys are the best. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. And that's all I have for you guys today. So stay safe, be a good human, and as always, remember to trust your lizard brain. Until next time, goodbye.